Welcome to the Ketogeek podcast. We live in the information age, and we are here to help you sift through processed information and find innovative solutions that work. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ketogeek podcast. My name is Fahad, and I am once again, as always, joined by
Corey, also known as The Alchemist.
Corey, man, we've been doing podcasts, a lot of them actually. We've come back. Do you think we're going to stay here for a long time, or are we going to fizzle off again?
I don't know, man. I think we're going to be here for the time being at the very least. There's so much to cover and talk about and what's going on in the world. And also we have lots of cool stuff to share with you guys, so stay tuned.
Exactly, and I think we will have a longer mileage considering that we're focused more on distilling information rather than just focusing on cutting down carbs. There's only so many carbs you can cut down before you become a zealot, I think.
Very true.
Anyway, welcome aboard, everybody. And I think everybody deserves, as always, an introduction to what Ketogeek is. Corey, I have no idea what Ketogeek is. Could you enlighten me?
Sure, man. So Ketogeek is first and foremost a food company. We make the energy pods, and I'll dive into that in just a second. But besides that, Ketogeek is all about exploring the unknown in the nutrition world and trying to combine food science, food nutrition, and more recently, agriculture. So we're looking at lots of cool stuff all at once. Going back to the energy pods, these things are amazing. They are compact meal replacements. People always ask, well, what are they? Well, they have a base of almond flour, ghee, MCT oil, erythritol, monk fruit, and we just add on top of that wonderful emulsified base flavors. So you have chocolate fudge. We add cacao powder to that. White chocolate strawberry. We use wonderful natural strawberry extracts to bring a beautiful strawberry flavor, and many, many more coming from us in the future, of course. They're healthy, they're nutrient, they're super energy dense. The cup that it comes inside is crush resistant, and it's fully recyclable packaging. You really cannot beat these things. And not to mention, the taste is just absolutely stellar. Silky smooth, rich, creamy, mature, and bold flavors. And the newest flavor that we just released, our Chocolate Nova, it has a little bit of added texture to it. We do like our really ultra smooth energy pods, but we felt like the added texture of dark chocolate chips would be a great thing to add to something like red cacao in our energy pod emulsified blend. So once you've had these, you literally cannot go back to your normal chocolate. What do you think, Fahad?
I think they're amazing. One of the interesting questions we recently were talking about and you got asked was regarding erythritol and some of the sweeteners. A lot of times people get a little confused or become skeptical about the kind of sweeteners that we use. So the two sweeteners, as you mentioned, are erythritol and the other one's monk fruit. So erythritol is a really awesome sweetener. It is, as we've mentioned many times, it's zero glycemic. It literally just passes through your body within about 24 hours. Most of it does. And then over time, it completely bypasses you entirely. Now, monk fruit is really interesting. There are some therapeutic benefits to monk fruit that have been shown in some very vitro trials. They have some antimicrobial properties, and overall, it's a very concentrated sweetener, and it just takes erythritol and gives it an extra punch. So these sweeteners are really awesome, and they have one of the highest tolerances among bulk and just natural sweeteners as a whole. So you can never go wrong with these. Other than that, like you said, it is amazing, convenient, simple, tasty, and now it is the epitome of a culinary experience, as we found out from our recent events that we did. So how can we use these energy pods? Well, The most simplest starting point is if you're on a keto or a low-carb diet, they are a perfect way to get the tastiest rendition of chocolate into your diet. They also happen to be a meal replacement, as we mentioned, so you can use that as a meal replacement as well. Now, some of the interesting things we found out, Corey, very recently was at a party. So, Corey, what happened during that amazing party? What did we do?
We brought something that we dreamed up one night. Had a couple beers, and we're just sitting down having some fun with 3D printing ideas, and we decided to come up with some stemware for the energy pods, specifically the Chocolate Nova flavor Infinity Series. The Infinity Series, for those of you who don't know, the packaging gets one additional technological component, and that is an iron disc that is attached to the bottom of the cup. This iron disc allows you to attach it to magnetic surfaces. And so we created wine stems that were magnetic and can be attached to the energy pods. We placed 4 of them on the table amongst all the food. The food, by the way, was world class. We're in Napa Valley, California, and this is a private party we attended. There was literally a leg of prosciutto on the table. I have never seen that before. But even with such an impressive display of food, people were gravitating towards the wine-stemmed energy pods, tasting them, and going nuts. Like, they were like, what are these things? And soon enough, the energy pods, for about a good 10-15 minutes, became the height of the conversation around the food. That was really interesting, super cool to see, and we look forward to bringing more fun things to the future, like wine stems. It just kind of enhances the experience. You can pick up the pod, look fancy with a lifted pinky, and share it around with your friends a little easier with some extra spoons, of course. So that was a really fun party, and we hope to do more of this stuff in the future, especially wine pairing. So if our listeners are winos or whatever you'd like to call someone who enjoys wine, send us your favorite wines, and not like literally send us your wine, send us like a message. Hey, like, I like to drink Cabernet. What should I have with my Cabernet? We will recommend energy pods that go with that varietal. It's pretty fun.
But just to give everybody a little bit of a spoiler, the white chocolate strawberry seems to hold up really well with a Pinot. And I think Merlot is turning out to be a really nice pairing partner with it as well, because Merlot has a bit of a fruity flavor, or at least the one that you brought to the party. Dude, that was like God tier Merlot.
Yeah, we have some, we're fortunate in the Napa Valley to have world-class wine and world-class food. It's really hard to go wrong when you're selecting a nice bottle from the Napa Valley.
Yep. And just to cap off the party, well, not really after the party, but later on, we started a bonfire, and then we made some s'mores, and the s'mores were dipped in the Chocolate Nova energy pod, and everybody was saying it is by far the best version of s'mores they've ever had in their life because of that. It was awesome. So you got to try the Chocolate Nova s'mores at all cost. Just do it. Go get some, and you'll be the life of the party. You'll be the top dog.
You're going to say goodbye to America's favorite chocolate, Hershey's, for the rest of your life.
Oh, man. So, Hershey's
how do people buy these?
Well, people can go to www.ketogeek.com and buy the energy pods there. They come with 2 to 3 day shipping, meaning that if you order right now, think about it arriving at your doorsteps in just a couple of days or so. You can also find them locally in stores in Napa. So they're available in Board Garden, Jeffrey's General. They're coming to First and Franklin pretty soon again. They are also in Sunshine Food Market in St. Helena, and then CalMart in Calistoga. We have an additional store that just joined our ranks. It's all the way in Montana. It's called Coffee Factory Roasters. They're in Red Lodge. It's basically the gateway to the Yellowstone National Park. You can't miss it. So when you're going through Red Lodge, just having a chill time, about to get to your next adventure, go drop by the Coffee Factory Roasters, get some coffee, pair it with an energy pod, and get to adventure. And if you're a retailer, you can always go to Fair or Tundra. We have an account there now, so you can purchase those energy pods from that place and then bring them to your store, your gym, or your hospital, or wherever you're going to put them, or even your workplace. What's cool is that if you're a retailer, we're now introducing a new docking system, or a docker that we call it, and it basically hosts up to 8 energy pods with a magnetic surface as well. It comes with an NFC chip, which is really awesome. Let's say if you're a retailer and you want your front-end staff to know more about the energy pods, those staff members can simply scan the NFC chip and learn about the energy pods. It cuts your life short and gives your customers an amazing product. So it's like a really innovative and cool thing to have in your location. I think, Corey, that's about it when it comes to energy pods. Guys, pause right now. Go grab some energy pods. Bring them to your life. You won't regret it.
And we'll ship them right away as soon as you order them. So just know that in mind. We love you guys.
Yep. And now let's get to a little bit of a news that we wanted to share with you guys when it comes to events. Corey, we have another Feast It Forward coming here in Napa, I believe. So what's that all about?
Yeah. I believe we've mentioned Feast It Forward in the past, but Feast It Forward, for those of you who do not know, when you come to Napa, there's this thing called the Oxbow District and the Oxbow Public Markets that's located downtown on First Street, the heart of downtown Napa. And Oxbow Public Market, as it's aptly named, there's lots of really cool shops. There's food, there's drink as well. They're all local Napa companies, local purveyors, and really great way to support the locals. But right across the street from the public market, there's this place called Feast It Forward, and they have something really cool going on there. They have turned this small little tiny area into a wondrous little hangout zone. There's shipping containers that are painted really nice, that have been cut out to allow lots of open air, sunlight, and you can see all around you since it's up a level or two. So you have those little guys. There's a music stage. There is also lots of spots for vendors to come in and fill. And so you have local purveyors and vendors coming in to serve the folks of Napa. And it is hosted on the second Sunday of each month in the summertime. Reggae Festival is held at Feast It Forward at this wonderful location. We'll be there this next one on August 14th between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. We're going to have some stuff going up on Instagram that day. Perhaps we'll do some stories, perhaps we'll do a live, and perhaps we'll make some reels. So stay in touch on Instagram if you feel like following the more up-to-date media. And yeah, we're really excited to continue doing these events because we end up meeting some of the coolest people on the planet. And it's just a really great way to network, meet with humans rather than sit behind a computer, stay on my keyboard and type to the world how delicious energy pods are, when you should actually be coming to Reggae and tasting the pods.
Yeah, and what's really awesome is that the entire location literally looks like a Disneyland for culinary or wine folks, and it's completely family friendly. They have a stage on there where they blast music, and eventually they're going to bring in some players as well. So it's going to evolve into one of the coolest hotspots in Napa where anybody can come in and have a wonderful time. So you can join us there and you can support us there as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. Do come by. And I think that wraps up everything related to Ketogeek. Now let's get into the podcast. And so, Corey, this was really an interesting podcast episode. I was just sitting on Twitter one day and I started noticing that something is happening in Sri Lanka. I started to look at Dr. Liza Dunn's feed, and she was talking about how that country had moved away towards organic farming, and the entire country had started to collapse. Riots, breaking stuff. The government went broke. The president ran away. Now, this isn't a topic we usually cover because it's so controversial and political. And there will be political notes here. But over here, I would recommend people to just take in certain components they find constructive and apply them to your life, apply them to your ideological calibration of some sort, and evolve from there. That's what I want people to do over here with this episode. And I reached out and I just asked people around on Twitter. Dr. Kevin Folta, who's been on our podcast, he recommended our guest today. And today we will be having Dr. Chana Prakash. I hope I said the name correctly. And let's just give you guys a little bit of a backstory on who he is. So Dr. Chana Prakash is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Tuskegee University, where he's also a professor of crop genetics and biotech. His research expertise is on genetic improvement on food crops of importance to developing countries. So he's done a lot of good work out there. His lab was among the first to develop GM sweet potato and peanut plants and conduct pioneering genomic studies on the peanut. He has been actively involved in enhancing the societal awareness of biotech in issues around the world. He also serves as the editor-in-chief of the journal GM Crop and Food. He is the winner of the prestigious 2015 Burlog Cast Communication Award, as according to Cast. He has arguably done more than anyone else in academia or industry to promote agricultural technologies that can help feed the world's growing population. He was also recognized by Huffington Post as among the top 30 social influencers in biopharma and biotech. You're gonna go to his Twitter profile, attracted by memes, cat videos, and all that crazy stuff, but you're going to stay in there for science. That's exactly what happened with me.
That's hilarious.
Yes, I think it says on his profile at the same time.
Nice.
So it's awesome. And I think, Corey, I'm very excited. What about you?
I'm stoked. I cannot wait to hear this story. Yeah, let's just drop right into it, man.
Let's do this. Let's make it happen.
My name is Dr. Chana Prakash. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Tuskegee University. And my expertise really is in the area of food and agriculture. And I'm a scientist, and my area of expertise in scientific research is on trying to understand the genetics of crop plants. And my background history is that I have worked on sweet potatoes and peanuts, and I've developed GMOs in both of these crops, and did research and trying to see how we can make them more resistant to disease, make them more nutritious. Plus also trying to understand the genomics of those crops at the level of DNA. What can we understand about the biology of these crop plants? But beyond that, I think my notoriety to a large extent comes from my past 25 or 30 years talking about genetics of crops, mainly GMOs, because that became very controversial in the mid-90s and still continues to be so today. And so I believe it's very important scientists like myself who are working in this area kind of step aside a little bit from our labs, from the ivory tower, and then explain what we're doing to the general public as to why this is important and why this is safe, or why we think it is safe, and by having an open mind about this as a society, how it would help us to achieve greater food security. As you know, the world is burning today. There's a great deal of climate upheaval, the hot temperatures around the world every day. We are listening about the floods and the drought. And so there is a great need for climate resiliency amongst our croplands, especially in the developing world. And we can see that one perturbation to our food system can really throw a spanner into it and just upset the cart, if you will. And the poor people are the ones who suffer. What's going on right now in the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that the food prices have gone up like anything in places like Egypt, which imports something like 80% of its wheat from that region. And their bread prices have gone threefold. And we just saw a government fall in Sri Lanka because it's a very irresponsible policy on the part of the Sri Lankan president related to agriculture that threw the whole country into chaos. So my background is that I grew up in India, in Bangalore. I studied agriculture for my bachelor's, and perhaps during my second or third year of my study over there, we had a great American scientist called Dr. Norman Borlaug, who came to my college and delivered a lecture. And I learned at the time about Green Revolution that had just happened in India. This was mid-70s. And as to how by introducing those dwarf wheat seeds into India and then improving the Indian system of agriculture, making its productivity more efficient through the introduction of not only high-yielding varieties of the crop plants, but also improved access to innovation, how better management of the soil fertility, better management of the crop diseases and pests, better outreach to the farmers through extension, and the new agriculture universities that were started across India in the 60s. All of them contributed to the so-called Green Revolution, so much so India, which used to be a begging bowl in the 60s, today is a major exporter of food, so much so that the past year India exported $25 billion worth of food. And so I kind of gravitated towards majoring in crop breeding, plant breeding, and studying genetics. And so that journey took me to Australia, where I got my PhD. And then I came to the United States, worked as a junior scientist in Kentucky for some time. And then I came to Tuskegee as a very young faculty many, many years ago. And then, slowly moved up the ranks. And now I'm the dean here at Tuskegee, managing a very large college. But I still spend a lot of my time communicating about science, communicating about agriculture and food issues, mainly through the social media. As you know, on Twitter and on Facebook pages, cumulatively, I have something like about 75,000 followers. And on a good month, I reach about 15 million people. So not bad for a dean who doesn't do any research anymore. And so that's my journey in a briefly.
Okay. So you mentioned something about the 90s, like something. Mm-hmm. So what exactly started happening in the 90s? When did this whole anti-GMO movement start? Where did it originate from?
Well, I don't think there is a single point of origin for this. It kind of grew organically, pardon the pun, through many means. But if there are 3 or 4 things that kind of led to or brought the anti-GMO movement to the forefront, was probably in 1999, there was a World Trade Organization meeting. I happened to be attending at that meeting. This was in Seattle. And there was a lot of protests against this meeting by many people who are opposed to globalization and increased corporate control of their lives. And so a lot of people showed up, and it really turned into a very nasty street fight, the protests with the police. At that moment, I think in Seattle, a lot of this anti-GMO seeds were sown. Because I could see Greenpeace and a lot of these organizations were in full force at the time, and they issued a lot of proclamation that GM crops are dangerous, they're untested, and they're Frankensteinian monsters unleashed by greedy corporations and mad scientists. And so that's when the press started picking up. So that was about 23 years ago. And at the same time, there was a report that came from Cornell University that that biotech crops, the BT, the insect-tolerant corn, the pollen from that was detrimental to the butterflies, the monarch butterflies. And that was a front page news all around the world. And beyond that, around the same time, Europe was in the midst of a very big food scare due to the mad cow disease. You see, in the mid-90s, when the mad cow disease came along, there's a very famous clip from the British Minister of Agriculture assuring the public, famously eating a hamburger and saying that, look, I'm eating this is very safe. You don't have to worry anything about mad cow disease because the mad cow, the disease does not transmit to the humans. He was wrong. And then it was shown around the same time, the news came along that humans could get the mad cow disease and people started dying. So that kind of eroded the public trust on what the scientists or the government would say about their food. And unfortunately, the GM crop, which had nothing to do with the mad cow disease, just caught up in those controversy. And so all of this led to the backlash against GM crops, which was just introduced only about 3 years before. And most people really did not know what these were. And in the US, there was not any special effort by companies or by any of the institutions to educate the public on what these GM crops were. And what happened was, in those vacuum of lack of knowledge was filled by misinformation, by activists who were opposed to GM crops for a variety of reasons, by organic food industry, which saw a great marketing opportunity to push people away from conventional food to their organic food, because organic food is non-GM by definition. And also at the Europe, as you know, in London, the tabloids are pretty notorious for screaming headlines. And they saw this as a great marketing opportunity to come up with all kinds of stories that GM food will cause you hair loss and make you impotent and things of that nature, to scare people, with absolutely no evidence of any of that happening. So I think it was a convergence of several things that unfortunately led to demonizing of this technology, which really is, we have now 25 plus years of safety data behind this. And I can tell you and your listeners that GM crops are very safe. They are as safe or even safer than conventionally developed food. And we have more than 3,000 scientific publications attesting to that. We have practically every national academies in every country coming out and saying that GM crops are safe. And also look at the evidence. We have been eating this for the past 25 years. You can walk into a typical supermarket in North America and find about 10,000 products which have been developed through the use of GM crops. And we have not had a single instance of any harm to anybody by the use of this, and also environmental catastrophe that was predicted didn't happen. And by embracing this technology, by keeping an open mind, I believe that we have much to gain, especially in the developing world, because we can have a greater sense of food security, we can increase productivity, we can ensure that there is not much loss to food despite increasing drought or increasing flood or increasing heat or even cold, because of our ability to develop such resilient crops. And also even more nutritional crops with added vitamins and iron to address iron deficiency anemia, for instance. All of that is possible with the current technology. And again, one more important development that has happened in the just last 10 years is we are moving away from GM crop technology. Instead of putting foreign genes, we now have a technology called gene editing, where we could alter the crops or even the livestock, their DNA, tweak it without having to put a foreign gene in.
What were some of the biggest rumors or myths that a lot of these activists brought up against the GM crops? And were there any truths involved in there? Were there some places where they were right about something? Or was it just mostly just fear-mongering?
Some of the more outrageous claims of them were clear fear-mongering. Something like, you see, for instance, golden rice is an incredible example of application of this biotechnology. This was developed in Switzerland and transferred to many other countries at no cost. In other words, there were no royalties claimed on this, and it was farmers could plant this seed at free of cost or at very marginal cost of development. In Philippines, it has been approved. But 20 years ago, groups like Greenpeace literally went and destroyed these crops that were being tried. They destroyed the greenhouse where it was being tested in Switzerland. And places like Australia, Brazil, and even here in the United States, in Michigan, the labs were burnt and destroyed. And so this is one extreme example of what activists did. And they claim that this is going to destroy our environment as we knew. The GM crops, once it is released into the environment, they're going to be very invasive. They cannot be controlled. And so those are some of the extreme claims that were made. But some of the more moderate claims is that the worries about GM crops is that it's going to lead to a greater corporate control of our agriculture. And so there is a certain truth to that fear, because many companies such as Monsanto were the leaders in the development of this. They were the ones who invested. Monsanto invested something like $1 million a day on research and developing this technology. And so naturally, there was a certain sense of worry, but that trend, as you know, the whole world has been globalized, and there's very few things that are not under corporate control, and we can debate about that. But on the other hand, when it comes to the safety of this technology in terms of its effect on humans or livestock or on the environment, there is a good science. These crops are highly regulated, and they are not just released willy-nilly. Every company takes about 10 years of testing of these crops. It costs anywhere close to $100 million to comply with the regulatory requirements to release a single crop trait. And so there is really not much substance to the argument that these are not safe.
So you are also part of a university, and you come across students. So yes, for future students, maybe high school kids or someone who's in college, university, someone who's doing research, what would you recommend they do, especially considering that there's going to be a lot of backlash these days? Like, how do the new students are they being given certain tools to combat this sort of new world, this information age?
Right. And misinformation is not limited to this technology. As you know, when we had the COVID, there's quite a lot of misinformation, fears against the vaccine. And the global climate change also, there's quite a lot of misinformation against the prevalence of this climate catastrophe that's ahead of us. But I believe what I think we would do justice, and as an educator, as a professor, and as a college administrators, what we need to train our students is in critical thinking. That they need to be able to make decisions based on the evidence that they have, and also to look for more trusted sources of information, because in this day and age where information is so easily accessible, as you can see, there's a lot of misinformation floating around. We saw that when it came to the election here, in how it was very decisive, when a lot of these actors were throwing misinformation during the election here in the United States. And so I think our new generation of citizens must be well equipped to be thinking critically, but they also need to be taught along the lines of how science works, because science, there is no a dictum in the science, and the science is evolving. Science corrects itself by the new knowledge, and so they need to be able to recognize many of the controversial issues, whether it's in nuclear energy, whether it's vaccines, whether it is effect of cell phones on your health, many controversial issues coming along. So one needs to make an educated judgment by looking at the evidence around you and try to look for more trusted sources of information. And I can see that it's not easy, because we have a deluge of information that is around us, and it is not very easy to make this valuable judgments on the future of it. And so that's where I believe scientists who are working on GM crops, who have a good knowledge of this, must be able to step outside their comfort zone and talk to the public, and to talk to the media, talk to the policymakers, so that they can make informed decisions about the future of this technology.
So what can, for example, if I'm an activist or even a person in the audience right now, what can I do to make sure that I get the right information? And this is to take into the fact that there are times where the mainstream media has actually started a crusade against GMOs as well. So what can normal people do over here, knowing that there's always going to be extremes, there's always going to be bad information, and also knowing that bad information travels way faster than something that may be, okay, everything's fine?
That's correct. And, a lot of times bad information is more exciting, and so that makes into the evening news. And when I say, it's like every day the plane will land, and that's not news. And when there's some problem with the plane, then obviously it's in the news. And so we need to be cognizant of that. And there's also an emotional component to that. When people hear of certain things, and we tend to get worried if there is a very disturbing news. But when things are all right, when things are safe, we don't tend to worry about that. And so what I really think is that we need a very, very solid trust in the regulation of some of these products or some of these science that we don't understand. So it's like we have to trust that, and like FDA, for instance, has had a fairly good track record in how they have approved of our food, how they have approved of our drugs. But when they make mistakes, they do acknowledge that there's a recall of drugs, there's a recall of foods. And so when we don't necessarily understand the science behind it, for instance, I'm not a nuclear physicist, so I don't understand all the nuances of the nuclear technology, or cell phones, for instance. So I don't know anything about whether they cause any damage to myself or my children when they use it. And so I trust that people at NIH or FCC or whoever is looking into it are doing a good job. And so that is one important consideration. And that's also one of the reasons why Europeans are much upset about this technology than in the US, where it was not as controversy at all, mainly because in the US we have a greater trust of our regulators here that they don't have in Europe. And also because of some of the bad instances of regulators messing up, as it happened with the mad cow disease. So it is not going to be easy, and so I do believe the path forward is going to be difficult for the general public, but they need to navigate that through with information from trusted sources.
So learning from our past and current affairs is something that all humans can do. One of the main reasons I reached out to you was because you were starting to tweet about the happenings in Sri Lanka. We touched a tiny little bit about it at the start. Now let's get a little bit deeper into it, how a country like that can just collapse. Like what we're seeing is insanity. So what is going on? Where did it start? What's happening?
Yeah, it's really sad. I've been to Sri Lanka, and I'm from India, and Sri Lanka is not very far from us. And Sri Lanka was always the most prosperous of all the countries in South Asia. And it was a middle-income country. And despite the civil war, they had a 25 years of civil war with Tamil Tigers, and that ended in 2009, 2010. And after that, Sri Lanka became very peaceful, and they were harvesting the peace dividends. And they were doing really well. Sri Lanka is a country that with only 22 million people, and it earned last year about $1.25 billion by exporting its tea, which is very good quality. And 80% of the world's cinnamon comes from Sri Lanka. And they also export a lot of other spices and rice. And they make a lot of money also through tourism. And so what really happened in Sri Lanka is a basket case of economic mismanagement. First of all, they had a very bad luck with the COVID, that affected all the rest of the world too. And so their main source of income through tourism was lost. And so did for 50 other countries. And secondly, what the president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, at the time in April of 2021, what he did was that he listened to some of these activists who are against modern agriculture and conventional agriculture, who have always been preaching that organic farming is the way to go to save the world. He listened to such groups of activists, especially one lady called Vandana Shiva from India, and then just proclaimed that his country is going to stop using all the modern fertilizers, modern pesticides, just ban them, stop importing them, because he paid about $400 million to import those fertilizers. And so he was looking for a way to save the money, because Sri Lanka didn't have much foreign exchange. And so this came very convenient, and he just proclaimed that Sri Lanka is going to go 100% organic right away without much planning or anything. And that was a very asinine move on his part, because a country that is so dependent on agriculture, now that the tourism is gone, then agriculture was just simply cut. It's like, just saying to the hospital industry that we're going to cut all the modern medicines, you see. And so it was a brutal blow to the ag industry, to the farmers of Sri Lanka, because they just couldn't apply any fertilizers in a way that the crop started failing, 20, 30, 40% loss in many of that. And then he said, okay, we're going to get you some organic manure instead. And that apparently imported tons of organic manure from China, which was found to be highly contaminated with human pathogenic organisms. So they couldn't use that anymore. And so this led to a disaster. And so this was a cascading effect of this, along with all other economic mismanagement. So Sri Lanka did not have any foreign exchange to buy petrol, the gasoline. They did not have any foreign exchange to buy cooking gas, the two most important ingredients, one that keep people moving and another one to keep people cooking. And there was not much food either for them to either to import or locally be grown, because Sri Lanka is a 100% rice eating country and there was not much rice. So there's a very complex issues, but it was all, I think it was made worse by this one single stupid decision on the part of this president. And now, as you know, the people couldn't take it anymore. They just gotten together, simply ransacked, got into the president's house and just literally threw him out. He ran away, went to Maldives and then to Singapore, tendered his resignation. So we have a new government in place in Sri Lanka. But still, it is going to take a long time for Sri Lanka to get back into the normalcy. But there is a lesson here, not just for Sri Lanka, but for the rest of the world, in that you just cannot mess with agriculture, okay? And you cannot take serious public policy decisions that involve scientific issues without consulting with your own scientists. Okay? And secondly, don't listen to some stupid activists who really have absolutely no interest of country's development or progress or agriculture in mind, and they are simply there for some ideological reasons. And many of them funded with vested interests, and you have no idea what they are, what their ulterior motives are. And finally, organic farming is a nice concept in theory, that it's nice if you go and ask people, do you want food without any chemicals, added chemicals to that, or pesticides, synthetic fertilizers? Everybody will say yes, right? Why not? But they don't understand that you just simply cannot grow food in a vacuum. So you need to have some nutrients coming from somewhere for them to grow. And so I concede that there are issues around the world with the misuse of fertilizers, especially in many of the developing countries. Sri Lanka was one of them, simply because fertilizer was subsidized and many times even given free to the farmers. So when you give anything free, like we have seen with water around the world, then people tend to misuse them. And when there is a leak, they don't care. You see? And so that has happened in many instances in Sri Lanka and in India and other places, and even pesticides, rampant misuse of that. And so if in those instances you try to analyze what is the problem, there are some really good solutions to that in terms of integrated nutrient management, second, third generation fertilizer that are slow release, and again, use of precision agriculture, where you tend to have knowledge about the fertility levels of each farm and apply fertilizer only on what is needed and how much is needed, and in a manner that has very low environmental runoffs. And so there is a very scientific process in trying to deal with these problems. Instead of that, what the president of Sri Lanka simply did was to throw a baby out with the bath water and just push the whole country into a chaotic mess.
That is so tragic. He threw the baby out with the bathwater. What he got was the entire cathedral being thrown out as well. So that's sad. So, like, for example, what was the intellectual community? What was the scientists over there thinking? Like, were they throwing some sort of pushback? And I mean, it's just crazy that you just, like, normally when you're doing some sort of a scientific test, you do a small sample size or a small period or sort of like a control trial of some sort. Did they do any of that? Anything?
No, they didn't. But, the scientists in Sri Lanka did speak up, because I have good contact with many of the scientists, scientific community in Sri Lanka, and they sent me some of the op-ed articles they had written in their local language. And if you go on YouTube, you can see some of the scientists speaking up. But, in many of our third world countries, there is not as much a greater freedom to speak as you see here in the United States. So they many of them were sugarcoating their protests, because remember, Rajapaksa was more or like a dictator, right? And as Shekhar Gupta, an excellent journalist from India, commented in September of last year, very rightly, that when dictators say something or come up with, they think that brilliant ideas, that people around them don't point out that this is a very stupid idea, even then they know it is stupid, simply because of the nature of the politics. And, the dictators tend to just brush them aside. And so I think there's a lot of common sense around the sphere of politics with Rajapaksa, but nobody could point it out. And some of the scientists who did speak up were very marginalized and ignored. And also remember, some of these activists has a big megaphone. They're very loud mouthed. And they are jet setting. Vandana Shiva earns $100,000 per lecture that she delivers here. And she is idolized as a green savior wherever she goes, especially in the West. And so this fascination of West with the poverty, and they're romanticizing the poverty of the third world. And when someone from the third world says that, hey, just leave us alone, we want to stay poor, and then they cheer on, it's kind of really very, very twisted, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's very, very tragic that we let all of this happen to us. I think even in our country, there's a lot of bad information that is rampant, but luckily we still have some solid committees and scientists and researchers. So if we were talked a little bit about the students, let's talk about active researchers and active practitioners who have a good mind, a good scientific thought process. What can they do to make a difference? You're doing something like that. Like how did you do this, and how can others do something like this where they engage actively with the public while bringing good science?
Right. And I know it's not easy, and it's not for everybody. I think most scientists really need to do good science and just keep doing that. But as some of us who could take some time off and to stick our neck out, and who can do a good job of communicating with the public in a manner that they can understand and they can relate, must continue to do that, because that is how the science will progress only when there is a public support. But also it will help public if we are grounded in a good scientific temper. It would help us to be wary of such charlatans who will come along once in a way and try to twist that. I'll give you a couple of examples of how bad science policies, like beyond what we saw in Sri Lanka, can be disastrous. One, there was a scientist called Lysenko who came around in the 1940s, 1950s, when in Russia, when Stalin was the dictator at the time, and then he kind of railed against anything genetic, conventional genetics, and he said conventional plant breeding is incompatible with the theories of Marxism. And so literally what they did was to put scientists in jail and then completely stop all active research on development crop improvement through scientific means, so much so that Russia literally paid for millions of people starving because of this very stupid path they took. And even recently in South Africa, for instance, the South African under Zuma, President Zuma and his health minister, they trusted a pseudoscience on the issue of HIV/AIDS. An American scientist, Duisberg, came up with the crank theory that HIV/AIDS, HIV is not the cause of AIDS, and that it could be, and we don't need the new drugs that were developed, the therapeutic protein cocktail that was developed to cure and control HIV/AIDS. And so they stopped importing all of those drugs, so much so that hundreds of thousands of South Africans died because of their very, very irresponsible policy on the part of the South African government, where they said that onion and garlic, can cure HIV/AIDS. You don't need all those fancy drugs that were developed. So there are direct, negative, tragic, catastrophic consequences of embracing bad science. And that is why scientists need to speak up. And also, I know at least in this country and many of the Western countries, we have good vehicles for where the scientists' voices are heard. FDA, USDA, they have policies of open hearing when they have to take any of the issues, and then to take some decisions if they're seemingly controversial. And there are science committees like National Academy of Sciences here in the United States, and they have a very good vehicle it was started by the US Congress 150 years ago and continues to do a tremendous job in trying to provide some very valuable science-based, evidence-based input on some of the forward-looking policies. So the Congress and the executive branch can make, and the U.S. president has a very powerful science policy office to guide the president. And so we do have good vehicles where the science can inform the public policy in this country and many Western countries. But unfortunately, that is not necessarily so in many of the developing countries. And that's where the pseudoscientists and quacks have a field day in many of these places.
What's also interesting to note in this new age is that, let's say you're a 30-year-old woman who's just about to have kids, works many, many hours. A lot of the times, these people may not have the time or the mental capacity to go and do a deep dive into some sort of a science. But sometimes they will consistently hear from their friends, oh, I did this based on something that the government was telling me to do, but it caused me to do something bad happened. So these stories just spark like crazy. What do you recommend that woman or that person in a similar boat can do about this when they hear these things? Because you're like, oh, okay, 3 anecdotes, 4 anecdotes. Oh man, now I should take this really seriously. Maybe I shouldn't do something like that, even though it is sort of approved. So how can those people sort of navigate the waters?
Well, I know it's not easy because if you have access to trusted sources, like on health issues, for instance, talk to your doctor and not necessarily your aunt. Because there are a lot of, sort of so-called traditional health practices. Sometimes can be very dangerous. And I see that around the world. There are a lot of good things that have come out of, traditional Indian medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. But the problem with many of this is that you don't know what works and what don't. And, when a traditional medicine works, it's not a traditional medicine anymore. It's just a conventional medicine, right? And so that is where we have a lot of problem. And so I would say, talk to in a health issue, talk to your doctor, and don't try to experiment yourself with something that you don't know. And we saw a lot of this during the COVID time. Remember, I used to get all kinds of remedies through WhatsApp, right? But, you can do this, you can do salt water gargle, and the COVID would disappear, this and that. And, at the end of the day, we know it was really the science-based vaccine that we developed was the one that, along with some of the other practices, that helped bring this pandemic down. And so I personally believe that we need to be looking at science-based evidence, and many of our decisions need to be data-driven. And for a common person, I truly don't have a simple answer to that, other than if you are going on the internet and just don't simply Google, you're seeking a solution. Try to go look into sources for information such as CDC.gov, Mayo Clinic, and things of that nature when you're looking for information on health. And when you're looking for information on something related to gardening or farming, go to USDA, for instance, And scientific establishments have a lot of position papers on many of these issues. And that's where vaccine and autism is a very good point here to illustrate. A lot of people were misled into believing that vaccines cause autism, so much so that there has been a move away from vaccine. Vaccines were, along with antibiotics, were the two most important developments in human knowledge that has contributed to our longevity. People who used an average lifespan used to be 45, 100 years ago. Now it is 75, 80. Is because of antibiotics and vaccines, food security and sanitation. And so much so that we eradicated a disease like smallpox, and almost eradicated polio. Now it has made a comeback. We even have a case here in the United States. Why? Because of this vaccine hesitancy that we are seeing. That is causing a major problem around here in the Western world. And we see polio coming back in Pakistan and Nigeria, for instance. And again, because of some of the political incidents that happened in those two countries. And so erosion of public trust in safety systems such as vaccine occurs because of a very orchestrated campaign by some of these groups with vested interests. And that is damaging public health overall.
One of the interesting things that I've observed is that government authorities, even if they do make a mistake, they reevaluate and update. What I found within the activist communities and the contrarian and anti-authoritarian communities is that they stick to the guns. They will die on the hill of their own ideology before they conform and agree that, okay, they got it right. So in that way, I think that the government authorities have a clear advantage in the messaging and in the way they do the science. Am I framing this correctly?
That's correct. And when you say government, again, at least, you can say with the U.S. government, when the government has made bad decisions, they have made bad decisions, and a lot of times it was based on insufficient evidence and insufficient science. They banned saccharine, thinking that it was bad for many years, and then they said, oops, okay, maybe it's not as bad as, because, the evidence later showed it was not as bad as it was thought. And the same with the DDT to a certain extent. And we still, DDT is used under specific controlled conditions for dipping mosquito nets, for instance. And the same thing with some of the drugs that were approved by FDA, but like Vioxx, for instance, turned out to be deadly, and it was stopped. And our information on cholesterol right now has been updated because we have new evidence that that fats are not as bad as we thought. And I know we now increasingly we know the sugars are more of the culprits in our current trends in obesity. So science every day gets better because of the improvement and accumulation of the knowledge. Okay, and it corrects itself. And so responsible governments do change their positions based on the latest scientific information. Just 2 days ago, I learned that all our theory of Alzheimer's disease based on the amyloid plaques that occurs in the brain was based on one single paper that came out from University of Minnesota 16 years ago. And now there's very good evidence that it was a fraudulent paper. And so many drugs that came about based on that, Alzheimer's treatments, tens of millions lives, probably lost because of this faulty paper. Now we are going to change our decision based on this. And so this is how science works, and it is not perfect. And but it does correct itself, and over time we are going to make decisions and improve decisions based on the science. And so the regulation saves lives. Like you can even look at cars as an example, automobiles. When we developed, we didn't have any regulations, and people were just driving the way they wanted, and then we had to bring speed limits and stop signs and stop lights, and then safety belts and the airbags. You can see cumulative and all the design of the cars are so much safer today than what we had 20, 30 years ago, and their exhaust system and everything. And that is how many of the products together cumulatively become safer. And like what will happen with chlorofluorocarbons, damaging the ozone layer is a great example of how we unleashed a monster without knowing when we started developing refrigerators with these chlorofluorocarbons that were damaging our environment, and so much so that ozone layer was damaged, causing serious repercussions on an environment and health. But today we have banished those chlorofluorocarbons, and so much so that ozone layer has now come back. And this is again a triumph of science and knowledge over some of our misdeeds that we also did because of science and technology.
It's a fascinating journey of human beings that we do this. Do you have to stop at in about 10 minutes, or are we?
Yeah, right. I know I have to stop.
Okay, so let's go through. Yeah, one more question. Actually, two more questions. One of the first ones, just to put a little bit of a fun aspect to it. So you've done research on GMO sweet potatoes and peanuts. Like, how does that work? Just to put a human face to the GMO sort of journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was more of an experimental research and a basic research to see. My early research was to see if we can come up with a method to put foreign genes into these crop plants, and we were amongst the very first labs to show that yes, we can do that in sweet potato and peanut. And in sweet potato, one of my research was to try to improve the nutritional profile of that to help improve the protein quality in sweet potato. But unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of funding to test those sweet potatoes for safety. And so that is something that is only can be done by a private entity in this day and age because it costs so much. And so we did not move forward in that. But some of my colleagues here at Tuskegee University are very active in developing peanut varieties through an improved process of gene editing. There's a great opportunity for research where we can improve the peanut oil quality, where we don't have to hydrogenate the oil, store it for long duration, and that is the kind of research. I'm not directly involved, but some of the people that I trained here and who worked with me are continuing that. And there's a great source of optimism because there's a lot of very interesting research going on around the world where we can develop a rice plant that can probably fix nitrogen, where you don't have to apply fertilizer.
Wow.
Yes, there is a great deal of research going on rice and corn plants which can fix nitrogen because air is 70% nitrogen, and some plants know how to take that nitrogen from air and fix it into the soil. In that way, you don't have to apply at least nitrogen as fertilizer. And also with phosphorus and potassium, how we can improve the nutrient efficiency of these crops and improve the nutritional profile of these crops, because half the women in this world have iron deficiency anemia, and iron is the most abundant element in soils. And yet, so this is very ironic that we are not able to translate that iron in the soil into the food because of certain technical issues that can be fixed through a process of gene editing. And so there is, technology has answers to some of the problems facing agriculture in the world, not all the problems, but we should not be ignoring the technology which does have solution based on non-scientific reasons, emotional reasons, and we should have an open mind. In that way, that world could be a better place.
Fascinating. I'm really excited for these newer technologies. I think we've hit the cap. I'm pretty sure you're going to be back on our podcast once again, because I think we just scraped the surface of many of the topics. So how can people find you and contribute towards what you're doing?
Yeah, look me up on Twitter or Facebook. My handle is AgBioWorld. It's AGBIOWORLD. This stands for Agriculture, Biology, and World. And look me up, and you can engage me in the social media.
Sounds good. Let's change the world, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Fahad. I enjoyed talking to you, man.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can visit us at www.ketogeek.com to shop our products or subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay in touch with all the latest and greatest information we have to offer. Don't forget to leave us a review for this show, as word of mouth is the best form of marketing we can get. Now let's change the world for the better together.